I chose to interview Jean Underwood for her historic perspective on incorporating social, emotional and cognitive development in her own practices in Australia in the 1950s and beyond. I'd like to go through in detail her responses to some of the questions I was asking her. In question 1, I asked, why did the location affect your classroom teaching? This was in response to how she described taking a different approach due to the location and nature of the community around her school. I found this particularly interesting because it shows that even at that early stage in the mid-1950s, teachers were considering the environment in which students and their families were growing up in. In question 2, how did people talk about how children learn, think and grow in the past? This one was particularly interesting because she pointed out that at the parent level, this wasn't considered in her particular role at that time. She also went on to explain that professionally though, there had been a systematic change from focusing on more the content delivery, and more on students as individuals. I think this is perhaps pinpointing that turning point in history where students were expected to sit up and just listen to a lecturer write on the whiteboard in front of them, to really being involved in their own education. In question 3, when a child was struggling in your class, how did you interpret what was going on for them? She showed a lot of genuine curiosity towards actually finding out what the root cause of some of these problems were. She also mentioned making adjustments for children who are facing some of these problems and changing their environment. It just shows that regardless, a caring teacher will seek to solve problems for their students, when they're affecting them at school. From about 6 minutes into the interview, I pick up on a tangent about an autistic boy. This leads into my question 5, where I ask what accommodations were made for that student that was diagnosed with autism. Again, she shows a particular amount of care for the students in her charge, and she also elaborates on how actually having that diagnosis was able to change her approach to how she dealt with that student. She was able to use that diagnosis of autism to acknowledge the unique position that they were in, show respect and understanding for their particular circumstances, and respected their growth within their own learning journey. She also mentioned that at that point, with collecting that diagnosis for this boy who was previously interrupting the classroom, that in taking into account some accommodations and some respect for their condition, they were actually able to then participate without the outbursts that were previously noted. In question 7, she asked what remained true about how children learn throughout your career. Well, she didn't answer this question very specifically. I love the point that she made about experiential learning. That just strikes at the heart of what I'm seeing from education behavioralists such as Tom Bennett and technique author Doug Lemov on Teach Like a Champion, and also from my own lecturers at university about how you actually need to create a genuine learning experience for the students to properly engage. And without that, you could be looking at lots of behavioral issues, lots of dysregulation with emotions, and checking out of their actual schooling itself. Okay, moving on. In question 9 was quite surprising because it related. She summarized differentiation beautifully. Now, I deliberately asked this question so as though not to be leading towards that more modern terminology. I was really curious to see what her genuine opinion and approach was to differentiation. And without pause, she noted that it was just common sense to be adjusting for differences, that it would be built into your planning, that you would be planning already for that differentiation before even getting to class. She also noted that it does require extra time, and that is something that we've seen professionally noted in lots of forums and interviews and talks with other teachers about the administrative load that creating this individualized differentiation can cause. In particular, it was noted that she allowed peer-to-peer interactions, and that this was perhaps seen as quite novel for the time. So this was the idea that students would learn better from interacting with their peers to discuss questions and content than they would if they were just rigidly sat expected to be quiet. Moving on to question 11. What is the most important thing teachers can understand about how children develop socially, emotionally, and cognitively? This is getting towards the end of the interview, and she summarizes it beautifully. We are all human beings. Often there's this drive to break down the education field into specific chunks that can be managed. But I think is what's far more poignant is to remember that human beings are inherently very complex. We all have our own drives, we are all the main characters in our own stories, we all have vastly different backgrounds, and we can even have different outlooks on the same event that we experienced at the same time as others. So just keeping that in mind, I found to be a very poignant point that she made. She also then goes on to point out that they were in that era of education taking note of growth stages. So is that accepting that children are there to develop and grow. They will go through puberty, they will go through developmental steps, and it's all part of the process to developing into adults. In closing, I was very surprised by how much social, emotional well-being Jean was looking after in her students at that stage, and the general knowledge behind cognitive development and stages that was present even 70 years ago. I think the best advice that I have received to date has been from a mentor that told me, look, there's going to be a lot of fads, there's going to be a lot of information about different strategies, pedagogies come out in teaching, but what works has normally always worked for a reason. And I think that we can see with Jean's approach that just being a empathetic, caring teacher will have you hitting most of the right marks for meeting a child's social emotional well-being. Thank you for your time.